Good morning and welcome to our TASIO webinar on AI-driven talent, which is AI in recruitment and assessment. I'd like to introduce you to our speakers this morning, and I shall start on my left with Bertie Muller, who is the Postgraduate Programme Director for Computer Science at Swansea University. Next to him is Tom Stroud, the CEO and founder of TASIO, and accompanying us also this morning is Rebecca Foden, who is a Senior Talent Acquisition Leader in Early Careers. Our agenda this morning is focused on 4 core areas, and we're going to work through each area in turn. The first area we'll discuss is the introduction to AI and some myth busting, followed by the use of AI for recruitment and talent assessment. We're then going to talk about how candidates are using AI. And lastly, we'll discuss whether we should mitigate, guard or embrace an AI. I know you've been asked to submit questions to this webinar this morning, and so we'll pick up a Q&A at the end of our programme today. So starting our conversation today, I think we wanted to talk about AI as a technology and how AI is changing. I thought it would be interesting to talk about when we really think AI came on the scene. So I'm going to ask my panel to start contributing now and explaining to me when AI actually started to be a thing. Becky, can I start with you and your thoughts around this, please?
Thanks, Lou. So as Lou said, I worked as an early careers leader for a large firm, and I think it's fair to say that the impact of AI was very prevalent in October 2023. So as we know, ChatGPT came out I think about 6 months earlier, but we started seeing graduates and our students using AI in our recruitment process. So it definitely had an impact, and we started to see some of the, challenges that organisations face right now presenting AI in a recruitment process.
Bertie, I think we talked earlier, didn't we? And we said that perhaps we'd seen AI coming to the fore, perhaps in the academic setting a little earlier. Do you want to talk us through your views on that?
Yeah, so a little earlier is quite an interesting term. I wear a second hat. I'm chair of AISB, the world's oldest AI society, and this society was founded in 1964.
Oh, that is a long
believe
time
it or
ago.
not, and the term AI was coined 8 years before that. So AI has been around for a very long time, and even the technology that's behind these new generative AI forms of AI has been around quite a while. Okay. So the foundation's neural networks, they've been studied towards the end of the last century already in quite some detail, but we didn't have the processing power to make them useful for many tasks.
No problem. And Tom, I think in terms of talent assessment, when did you start to see AI becoming more of a topic of concern or consideration or embrace in that sector?
I think, to be honest with you, very similar to the way that Becky sort of described it. I think probably towards the tail end of 2023, it started to become a lot more commonplace in terms of, I suppose, public awareness of the technology with the launch really of ChatGPT. I think prior to that, there were, shall we say, some outliers, some of those maybe more technical people that understood that this technology was available and could be used in various different ways. But yeah, I think probably really at the end of 23 was where we really started to see it, gain real traction, and people start to understand that it could be used for improving their chances when it came to recruitment.
And the development of AI, do we think, has it happened slowly? Has it sped up? Has it been a slow burn to this point, or has it always been quite quick and we've only just cottoned on to it?
So one of the big challenges that most organisations in the world faced post-COVID was the digitalisation of the workforce. And so all of a sudden organisations became digital tech companies, and so there was a huge embracing of digital technology. We know that students were no longer on campus, so they had all of their lectures online, and as a result of that, many organisations were forced to completely digitalise their recruitment process. So the acceleration of AI and ChatGPT has effectively been in parallel to some of the trends that were happening already.
Okay, that's
and
interesting.
so I think the adoption of technology has definitely accelerated since COVID.
Thank you. Tom and Bertie, do you agree with that? Do you think it has been in some way sort of accelerated by COVID and this non-human contact piece, or do you think it's always been in the background?
I think from my perspective, I think it's, as Bertie obviously alluded to, it's been around for an awful long time.
Yeah.
And I think probably it's been hidden maybe in many ways. So I think it's actually been seeping into our everyday lives without us really noticing it.
Okay.
I think, as we were saying earlier, obviously a large part of when you use Google, there's AI in the background, which is basically delivering the results that you're looking for. It's understanding what you mean by those queries, and then it's helping that to deliver the right results to you. So I think it's been around. I think it's like a lot of these things, though, that suddenly you get that sort of break in, you move from early adopter into sort of mass market, and then you get the proliferation of new technologies and new companies. And I think now with the massive increase in sort of the ability of cloud computing and various other things, it means that it's a lot. You can actually deploy a lot of these new technologies and create them much faster than we would have done, in years past with traditional sort of industries and things like that. So I think that's probably
No problem. Thank
I think COVID has definitely moved things online and into the digital space much more than previously, and then becoming available freely. ChatGPT was, of course, a big push, and this is why kind of AI is now, in the media at least, synonymously used with these large language models that drive ChatGPT and similar.
But do you think that AI has
services.
been used in other industrial sectors or embraced more readily in other sectors? I mean, for example, I don't know, automotive, maybe engineering, or perhaps science, in a way that we haven't experienced. Do you think certain sectors have led on the adoption, if you like, of AI? Or do you think it's been fairly standard across most sectors?
So I believe that it has been adopted in retail and manufacturing already. So it has been around. I think that the key trend that we're seeing now is that it's now become easily accessible to everybody. So day-to-day accessibility, and because we moved online with recruitment, then AI enables candidates to be able to pass interviews quicker, faster, and to be more successful. So there is a direct benefit between using AI and benefiting from a recruitment process. So I think the adoption is quicker. And in October in 2023, that there was some research that 50% of students in the UK were already using ChatGPT, and according to a research company, they're estimating that this will be 90%, by 2024. And so what we're also seeing in the workforce is that most firms do not have a formal AI policy. So it's only about 10% of firms actually have an AI policy, but yet 40% of employees, and this was 6 months ago, are using AI day to day. So there is a proliferation of AI and this accessible nature and the benefits that it brings to everyday lives.
So should we talk a little bit about the common claims around AI? So what is AI regarded as, and how do people see it? And again, we did chat earlier, but I think some of the common claims have been, for example, that we'll all be made redundant because AI is going to take over our roles. I mean, Bertie, what do you think about that?
Well, but one of the important things is AI will definitely have a profound impact on the job market. I think that's pretty clear. And what's also pretty clear is that those who have an idea of how AI works and can facilitate AI will have a benefit on the job market. So it's not necessarily that AI will make you redundant, but someone knowing how to use it effectively and efficiently will have the edge over you in job applications.
That's interesting. Tom, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's going to have a massive effect. It probably already has. I mean, we're seeing it almost day to day. Just in our own business, we're using AI in different ways, and how can we use it? And as we were saying earlier, a lot of the software packages that we've got now, they've all got this little pop-up with the little sidebar that says, use AI to improve this the way that you're doing something or other. I think from the job market perspective, I think there's definitely no doubt that certain roles will maybe not be quite required in the way that they have been, and they will change drastically. But I think generally across business, they are going to, you're going to have to, I think, to continue to succeed in your role, and you're going to have to adapt. You're going to have to take it on board. I mean, that's not obviously this. I mean, I wouldn't say a bricklayer is necessarily going to use AI to improve their bricklaying, but I think any knowledge-based role is potentially there are ways that you can adopt AI and use it to improve your efficiency and your performance.
That roles will change, Becky, perhaps rather than people being made redundant, there'll be a different requirement for skills and different skills required in the future. Is that what we're talking about? An evolution of skill sets?
So some of the, I guess, the thoughts that companies have at the moment is how generative AI will change role profiles. So for example, it will make auditors or lawyers more efficient. So some of the mundane tasks can be can be done via generative AI. So AI has the ability to create more value, so human value in terms of doing different types of activities. And so there is a thought around how will it impact roles in the future of work and a profession at sort of a macro level. But also we know that 65% of the roles have not yet been invented. So AI will and technology will allow humans to do different types of work which are more value driven. And as I said, 65% of roles are not even invented yet. So that blows my mind.
That's quite a big change, isn't it?
Huh?
There's, to me, a risk there in expecting AI to take all those mundane tasks off of you.
Yes.
Maybe
it's a wish list for people.
Well, I'm sure this will happen, and it is happening already. However, the risk is that all of those more demanding tasks will stay with the humans, and that means it will have a huge impact on burnout, and you'll have to expect to kind of slow down somehow, and that might lead to...
I agree with that. So we had this conversation recently. If you look at TA, so talent acquisition, I can directly, I guess, relate to the industry and profession that I'm in. There is a thought around, can AI replace some of the mundane or the administrative tasks? Yeah. It can. However, what we need to do is make sure that we are building different capabilities into the profession. So, for example, if a more demanding type of work or more sort of that requires more curiosity or applied thinking, then we need to also train those individuals in the profession to be able to deal with that kind of activity. And to your point, Bertie, around burnout, and what we're seeing is that AI has replaced certain tasks in talent acquisition, for example, but yet we haven't actually trained the talent acquisition professionals to do different types of work. So, for example, stakeholder-driven work, having difficult conversations with stakeholders, strategy development. So there is a risk of replacing work, but not actually then contributing and upskilling. Yeah.
And I suppose perhaps there's an expectation then of the same level of output from an individual seat if you look at it from an organisational design perspective. But if the tasks in that role are significantly harder or more draining, to your point then, Bertie, actually you've got to expect slightly less of an output, a more quality output perhaps, rather than more of an administrative output. And I think that's going to be interesting to see how people structure their businesses accordingly. I'm going to move on now, if I may, to our second topic point today, which is the use of AI for recruitment and talent assessment. And I just want to talk about, in the round really, how have we seen AI start being used in talent assessment? And well, let's start with recruitment, shall we actually, because that's the start of it. And how do we see that changing? I mean, Tom, do you want to give us your experience of where you see it starting in recruitment? Where's AI come in?
So it's interesting. We first really looked at AI as a business in terms of the assessment of candidates probably about 5 years ago.
Okay.
So we were approached by a company that were looking at doing analysis of video. So we started out as a video interviewing company, so that was at the time, that's what a large chunk of our business was about. And we looked at ways that we thought, well, great, is there a way that we can use AI to analyse the videos that the candidates were recording to basically try and pick up on, you know, on personality traits, on various other sort of maybe emotions. Did they look confident? Were they nervous? And at the time, I remember the company we were working with were talking about, well, this is all going to be around honesty. So it was, but you could ask a question and you know, almost like the sort of online video lie detector sort of thing, that you'd be able to see, oh, that candidate, you know, definitely a bit dodgy. They're probably not answering that question correctly, or, you know, completely honestly. And I remember at the time we thought this is going to be transformative. You know, this is going to really make life so much easier for recruiters. They're not going to have to sit through watching lots of videos and doing interviews and etc. But at the time we found that there just wasn't. Now that, again, this was 5 or 6 years ago, there wasn't necessarily the computing power or the accuracy to be able to say, no, that's definitely right. So you couldn't make a decision on it. You know, there's no way you could say, oh, that person's definitely right for this role based on how they answered a particular question. So we sort of kind of canned that at the time and sort of put it to one side and just kept a sort of a watching brief really to see how it evolved and how it's developed. So I think that's probably still not really there at the moment. Again, especially when you're doing a video interview over a camera phone, or, you know, with background and noise and various other things, I think it's impossible to really assess the candidate from that perspective. But certainly there are other ways, I believe, that from an assessment perspective that you can possibly use it. I suppose there's two sides to it, isn't there? There's as a recruiter, you're using AI to streamline your administrative process. So, and then there's from the candidate's perspective, is they're using AI to optimise their responses and their answers and give what seemed to be the perfect model answer, because that's been generated in ChatGPT. So then from a technology perspective, how do we guard against that? And I know we'll come on to that a bit later on.
Rebecca, in terms of the recruitment process, or particularly looking at early years or early careers, how has AI started to enable or has it enabled that recruitment process? Do you want to talk to me about the evolution there and how AI has come to the fore for you?
So I think that AI is very disruptive right now for recruitment and for talent acquisition professionals.
Okay.
I think that that there's on the plus, that there's an opportunity to streamline your recruitment process, to have predictive potential analytics, to have built algorithms that will allow potentially diverse candidates to come through that process. So that is, very much something that most talent acquisition professionals would embrace. But then on the downside, there is a huge impact that I think companies did not predict, that is more behaviour driven, around potential candidate inauthenticity. So in a high volume recruitment process where you've got thousands of candidates entering the process, there are what ChatGPT and other AI tools have allowed is that it is actually easier to cheat now. And cheating has been around for hundreds and thousands of years. It's always been there, but it's now easier to cheat. So what companies are seeing, and I've spoken to many companies, are fake applications, right through to potentially candidates that are not authentic on video interviews, so called migration agents, through to improbable scores. So has AI or technology enabled candidates to pass certain cognitive tests, right through to effectively sharing of assessments online, and effectively help AI and technology enabling candidates to pass certain recruitment processes. So I think there's and as a result of AI and technology, it's actually made recruitment more difficult. So the idea is it should streamline, but now you have to be able to design a recruitment process that has an active detection model built in that has a deterrence, and it needs to be designed well. So it's actually making TA more difficult.
Thank you. I think we talked earlier about the impact of AI on candidates' ability to apply for roles. And I just wanted to come back to that point because it's interesting how candidates are able, through the use of AI, to apply for many, many, many more roles. And actually the talent pool effectively per vacancy has exploded in some regards. And you've got a massive pool of talents that you need to be able to work through. And whether AI has kind of made its own bed in some ways because people are so able to apply for vacancies and find those roles that the pools fill up, and then you've got talent acquisition managers trying to work through this and using AI to help themselves. So it almost seems like one has caused the other.
So this is the unpredicted consequence that's happened with AI. So if we talk about early careers in particular, the student behaviour is one that is possibly anti-loyal organisations. So students, the trends are that they're doing 5 internships, they're collecting internships, collecting work experience. And this was also down to COVID impacts where there was a reduction of roles in the market. So students realised that they need to apply for many more roles. And then if you speak to finalists that are looking, so 45% of finalists are actually looking for roles in the graduate market. 55% haven't actually thought about applying. They're perhaps taking a gap year, and there's this concept of delayed adulthood because of the impact of COVID. But the 45% that are applying are possibly applying for 20 roles. This was pre-AI. What AI has enabled now with some of the auto apply tools, and there's many of them available, and there's one in particular that is graduate specific. It will allow graduates to effectively apply to hundreds of opportunities that are completely skills matched, that will generate application answers based on company specific questions. So it has really enabled students to throw in many more applications, which again is making it much more harder for organisations to sift through, to detect those genuine candidates, but also it will increase cost base for an organisation because there will be more volume coming through as well.
Thank you. I want to talk a little bit about, I suppose, whether candidates using AI, whether this is fake, whether this is plagiarism, or whether this is enhancement of offer, I guess, from a candidate perspective. And I don't know, Bertie, whether you've got any examples on or thoughts around when does the enhancement of a proposition cross the line? And this is a very difficult question, so I'm not going to hold you to your answer. But I think it's an interesting one to talk about this morning. Is the use of AI from a candidate's perspective? And I was curious to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, what you're talking about is actually how can AI be used and how should AI be used in this process. And we see at university a lot of assessments that are not in-person controlled assessments. We see a lot of submissions that we suspect are generated by AI. Now, as with AI algorithms, looking at them as a human might produce false positives, false negatives. And there's not really a way to completely avoid that at all. In terms of improving an output, we at university would say, well, as long as the ideas are actually something that the human put into this, and they're just using AI as a tool to rephrase, to polish the presentation of this, then that's okay. But I can imagine that there are roles that people could apply for that require just that eloquence, and if they pretend to be eloquent by using AI and then turn out not to be in a role that cannot be supported by AI, that might be a problem, of course.
I think there's an issue here around integrity, and particularly if you if you look across industry right now, where you have some industries or some professions that are highly regulated, that, for example, law or accountancy, finance. And so it's absolutely imperative that candidates that enter those professions have the utmost integrity. So I think certain professions, it's important that the candidate is the genuine candidate, that they've actually sat, if there's a requirement to sit a numeric test or a cognitive test, and that is part of the academic, success of that role in terms of being professionally qualified, then it's important that that candidate is authentic and that they're set up to succeed. But that said, if you're outside of the regulated industry and you're working in tech, for example, or it's a creative industry, then AI, I guess in that situation it would be much more adoptive and it can be more embraced. But I think there is definitely an integrity question around, did you actually sit that test yourself, or was it generated via AI, the answers?
So in terms of building AI into the talent assessment process, I think we've talked about it from recruitment in terms of reducing the pool of candidates down by having some sort of hurdle-based programmes. How do we think it's best to embrace AI in talent assessment? Would there be any things that we'd want to say, actually this would be a sensible idea, or actually this would be something to guard against? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think from my perspective, it's that if I'm honest, we did a speech up in Manchester a couple of months ago, and we talked to the audience. It was an interactive workshop, and I think that the underlying feeling at the end of that workshop was that we don't know at the moment, to be honest with you. I think nobody really knows whether or not we should be going full on and saying, look, AI is out there, it's everywhere you look, we've just got to embrace it, we've just got to accept that when we're recruiting for a role, we've got to understand that candidates are going to most likely use it. So in that case, what do we do to guard against that? So do we try and stop them? So do we try and put measures in place so that it becomes harder for them to actually use the AI to provide their answer that they want to give? Again, I think one of the interesting things that came out of, again, a conference I was at earlier in the year, for early careers, and they were saying that every application that was coming through looked exactly the same, because all the candidates were doing is they were going onto the job spec, cutting and pasting the job spec and the person profile, all that sort of thing, sticking against ChatGPT, and surprise, it spewed out pretty much, maybe with a slight variation, the same answer. And a lot of candidates, as you alluded to earlier, they'll just apply for every job they can, and they won't even go to the effort of actually saying, okay, that's my model starting point, and I'm going to personalise it, I'm going to adapt it to suit my own particular skill sets and what have you to make it apply to that role. So that becomes really difficult from a recruiter's perspective, because they all look the same. And then, as you say, if you've got traditional cognitive assessments and psychometric assessments which are being done or being assisted by the use of AI, how do you then start to balance against those candidates to see whether or not differentiate them?
Can I bring in a difficult word that I'd like us to discuss a little bit in this, if that's okay, which is the word bias. And I want to talk about bias in the talent assessment process, particularly where AI is involved. And I want to understand whether we think that, how do we ensure, or how do we guard against rather than mitigate, because I'm not sure you can, but we talked a little bit about bias, and I want to talk about it really from a demographic perspective as well, and accessibility to AI tools and so on. And I know as a group earlier we talked about accessibility to AI and how some applicants who perhaps don't have access to these tools would face some sort of detriment in the recruitment or talent assessment process. And I don't know, but I know we talked a little bit about it. Do you want to carry on from there?
I think the important thing here is to understand that these AI algorithms are not actually typically algorithms that someone programs and makes decisions on how does a particular phrase impact the chance of getting a job. It is more like using data pools that are available, and of course if there is bias in that data pool, if say in the medical sector in the past we've had more male doctors than female doctors in certain areas, then that might have some bias effect on the recruitment process, because it might favour those, and that's where we need that awareness of how are these decision-making processes actually generated based on data that's available.
I think there's an accessibility issue here for particularly for social mobility. So if we think about this, I guess logically, as a recruiter, I may all of a sudden receive 400 candidate CVs, and actually I might use AI to select the top 10 candidates. And the reality is that the likelihood is that those top 10 candidates have an AI facilitated process, and the likelihood is that they perhaps are using a paid version of an AI tool, so as an optimizer. So I think until we can get to true predictive analytics in HR to look at those pipelines and to be able to start to differentiate between paid AI or accessibility versus social mobility, then and that's one of the great opportunities for AI is the predictive modelling and most likely outcome type approach, and how do you actually then build your recruitment process to ensure that there is equity and equality. But we are not there yet, and I think there is a real risk right now that we're using AI and there are early adopters that are literally embracing AI and putting it into their recruitment process, but there are unintended consequences around equality. And also, if we think about, I was at a conference last year where there was 100 career advisors at universities, and they felt that the organisations are adopting technology so quickly that there is definitely a disadvantage to students that don't actually have the same tools or access to the same tools as those students that perhaps have a little bit more privilege.
So I think one of the important things we need to look at here is something called XAI, explainable AI. Okay. So in those processes where we might suspect there's a bias, we can use explainable AI models to highlight what are the features of the data set that we're using or the data that we're using that contribute to the decision that's been made. And this doesn't come without caveats, because there's been cases shown where different explainability models might disagree about what is the predominant feature. So that we're kind of moving into an area of...
I guess the other point to make on this is it's really valid. It's like if you have a propensity to hire the same type of talent, so for example, this talent is a specific demographic, then effectively will AI follow that trend? Because it is learning, it's machine learning. So how do you bring different context into the recruitment process? How do you ensure that you're not overlooking certain talent pools, because actually the organisation may not need the same type of talent pool? They perhaps want to hire a broader church of talent, but how is AI developed within the recruitment process to be able to bring that talent pool through? And I think that for me is a big issue at the moment around the lack of context that AI is actually enabling within the recruitment process.
And do you think talent acquisition leaders are skilled enough and they have enough knowledge at the moment to really think these things through, or do you think it's going to be an evolution and we'll learn as we go? How do you think that's going to work? I'm
hearing on the ground that there are TA leaders that are very reticent to adopt AI, and there's they are effectively do not want to become the early adopters, but they are, as you mentioned earlier, absolutely looking in and observing, but there are some organisations that are absolutely adopting, and there's a large organisation that is using it as screening all candidates, for example, and there's some use cases here that they've managed to save millions of pounds in cost avoidance by reducing that talent pool and creating efficiencies. But actually, what are the long-term consequences? Because has a study been undertaken around the kind of talent that's been hired? So it's I think we will see, and it's going to only be a test of time, I guess, until we start seeing some of the case studies.
I think there's another issue that concerns me, to be honest with you, as well, is if we start to use more and more AI, as you say, screen these candidates to get that number down, that big number down, to a smaller number. And the problem is, if you're building out that model on the basis of our perfect candidate or our perfect employee looks like this, and then what you're going to end up with is you're going to end up with teams that are full of basically lookalikes. Everybody's exactly the same, and that's obviously you ruin your diversity. So again, there's all that issues around diversity and inclusion, etc. And you end up with teams with everybody looks the same, and then productivity falls through the floor because we've always done it. We all look the same.
There's no diversification.
No fresh thinking.
There's lots of examples of this where AI. So if you're thinking about reducing that candidate pool, it's very likely that a talent acquisition professional, because I am one of them, so it's very likely that the thought process that we would go through would be, let's actually use the same sector experience, so let's shortlist candidates based on the same market vertical, so thereby you're not bringing any diversity of thought in from different sectors. So this might actually prevent organisations from growing because actually they're not bringing that broad set of talent through the organisation. So I think that we have to be careful around how we use AI. I think there's an opportunity to use it and embrace it, but we just need to be careful that we're not there are not unintended consequences of trying to bring that list down, but actually you're hiring the same kind of people.
Yeah, that's a big problem with these generative AI approaches altogether, when they draw from that diverse set of data all of what we've written in case of ChatGPT over decades and hundreds and thousands of years if you go into really early texts. If we now move to generating everything by ChatGPT, we will not have that creativity anymore. It will all be the same. It'll be narrowed down even further. And
to the knowledge base that exists purely in ChatGPT, because that's from where it can draw all of its content.
And then you lose all those opportunities to make that big leap of faith or that big leap of technology. You end up with everything just becomes very similar.
Same.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes you want some blue sky thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and different industries have different diversities, right? So, if you're in engineering, for example, it's very male dominated. So if you're then only hiring in engineering, then no shock, you will have a male dominated candidate pool. So, I think that for a TA professional, we need to be looking outside of the box, and we need to be thinking about how do we find transferable skills, and this then feeds into skills-based hiring, which is the biggest, I guess the biggest buzzword in TA right now. So how do we move more towards skills-based hiring to allow that diversification, to allow more contextual thinking? And I think that's an exciting opportunity for TA, but we're not there yet. So it's an evolution.
No, thank you. I'm going to move on to our next section, actually, which we briefly covered, but I think there's a little bit more we can talk about in terms of the use of AI through the assessment process and candidates particularly using it. Where do we think that maybe there's sort of social norming or social pressure to use AI? Do we think that there are certain stages in the recruitment process where AI is acceptable, and there are certain stages where it's not? I mean, if we break down this, Tom, I don't know whether you or Becky, whether you've got some thoughts around where could it come in and be an acceptable point, and where would we like to remove it from, do you think, or guard against it? That's a better word.
Where I feel I can talk, I guess, from experience around where it's definitely not acceptable. Okay, so where there is a red line, and the red line is for a specific test. It could be a numeric test or a cognitive test using AI, replacing a human is not acceptable, and organisations are starting to see this concept of improbable scores. So these are superhuman scores, so advancing 200 percentile. So that is not acceptable, because actually what we want to see are real candidates that can actually perform the role and pass those exams that are required and have that academic strength, and so thereby it's important that the candidate is absolutely authentic.
Tom, from a technology perspective then, how do you think technology can facilitate or manage against some of those concerns that Becky has?
I think it comes back to the earlier point we made, which is, are we going to embrace technology or embrace AI and say, no, it's going to be acceptable for this element of the assessment process, but not this element? Yeah. If we go back to the initial application form, they all look the same, so that that almost rules it out. You might as well forget about having an application for, or a cover letter or something like, because they're all going to look the same. You can't differentiate between candidates. Right. Absolutely agree with Becky. If you've got a psychometric test or an aptitude test or some situational judgment test or something like that, where you're trying to assess a candidate's behaviour within a specific role or their cognitive ability or their underlying natural capabilities, if they're using AI to basically cheat the system and get the perfect score, again, totally unacceptable and pointless again, because when you then get in the role, if they've suddenly got there and they've got a 90 percentile numeric reasoning score, they get into the they've got this great job at a leading top 5 or accountancy firm, and the first day they turn up and they say, right, off you go, and how do I switch on the computer, or how do I add it's impossible.
I think it's setting. It's important that organisations set people up to succeed, and if they have not been genuine, or they've had support from AI in specific aspects of the role, which are absolute requirements to pass certain tests or academic qualifications, then the likelihood is that they're not going to pass the vigour of those academic qualifications or perhaps become qualified. So further along down the track, it's a problem that is going to reveal itself. So it's really important to have the absolute integrity of the candidate in the process. But I do think that from an enablement point of view, AI can be used to help you articulate your CV better, to format your CV better. It can be used to format PowerPoint presentations. It can be used to take meeting notes. So I think from that perspective, AI is advantageous. But to Tom's point, where all CVs are looking the same, for example, if you plugged in, give me the perfect CV to be an accountant, and every single CV has gone through ChatGPT or Google Bard and it's presented the same CV, it's going to be very difficult to differentiate candidates. So I think there has to be some sort of human interaction with AI to ask the right questions, to try to represent yourself, as your best professional self as possible.
I think we talked a little bit about earlier some of the tools or the mitigations that companies are putting into place. So perhaps accepting that this is part of life, and then looking through the talent assessment journey when you've got a candidate pool through to post, for example, and saying, well, at certain points in this, we're going to be looking at the behaviours of candidates because we want to know whether there is an influence here from ChatGPT. And I think one of the things that I've read is around sort of looking at the keystrokes per minute, for example, restricting time, restricting access, or having cameras on. I don't know, I think whether we want to talk a little bit about where do we think in the process that we can put those checks and balances in. We all know the talent assessment process can be long and varied, but are there specific areas, do you think, Tom or Becky or Bertie, that we should be, could give us an insight as to whether this is an enabled application or whether this is an enhanced application?
It's very tricky, and I'm referring back to something that's called the Turing test, which was invented by Alan Turing,
Okay, yes.
and it was meant to be the test whether a machine can be called intelligent. And we've had competitions that simulated this Turing test, which essentially means you've got a judge, a human, and a machine.
Right.
They communicate via a text-only interface, so it was kind of a typewriter, teletype thing. Initially, this was invented in the 1950s. And what we saw in later iterations of this Turing test in competitions, the programmers of the AI, the machines that were pretending to be human, just included hesitation, typos, etc., simulating to be human. And I can see this.
Dark AI, I've read about this. There's the emergence of dark AI. You know, you could.
I mean, if there are tools that probably are used also commercially for applicants to use, they will try to trick the assessors. By introducing similar things.
I think that's a really good point, and I think that there is a definite, if we're thinking about predictive modelling, it's going to take, the companies will be looking at predicting modelling in our HR analytics. So do we have the right candidate pool? Are these candidates most likely to be successful in our process? Are they going to predict job performance? That's from a HR perspective. From the candidate side, which is the enablement side, it might be, how will I get through this process making some mistakes to allow more authenticity?
Or perceived authenticity.
Perceived authenticity. So I think that that's interesting, and there's some psychological psychology behind this around your sort of almost like your other self, around that. I think from right now, it's important that in the recruitment process that the candidate that is presenting, if you think about some companies, you have multiple steps and they are assessed in different ways. So some of them are assessed via automated decision, some of them are assessed by humans that are screening in the process. So there are different touch points in the recruitment process, but what we need to make sure is that the candidate in that process is a real authentic candidate. So for example, a basic ID and V check. I think that facial recognition, similar to dating sites, not that I'm on them, but basically facial recognition should be absolutely part and parcel. I haven't seen it yet in the assessment process, but I think that we need to fundamentally understand, is it a real person that's coming through the process, and also certain things that you can do, randomizing questions, for example, not having the same question banks, and also detecting improbable scores or unusual trends that are not normalized.
I think one of the, again, this is a subject we discussed recently, and I think one of the interesting ones was a couple of areas we can do. I mean, there are some ways you can do that. You can avoid, you can sort of disable cut and paste and things like that into questions. And as I say, you can structure the questions in certain ways so that they are maybe more yes or no, or then very much give me an example of, that sort of personalises it, which becomes harder for a ChatGPT to have that life experience and then be able to articulate that in their answer. One of the interesting ones that I found as well was actually, it was really basic, was just at the very start of your assessment process, you have an honesty sort of button or a statement that says, we are going to be assessing you. We want to assess you on your abilities, your motivation, your capabilities, your skills, etc. Therefore, we would kindly ask that you do not use ChatGPT or generative AI to improve your performance or your scores or your because we really want you. And the reason we do that, and you explain it, because ultimately we want to give you a job, we want you to be successful, we want you to still be working for us in 12 months' time. Now, if you, I hate to say it, if you come in and you're suboptimal for that particular role, but you use ChatGPT to make your application and your assessment process absolutely spot on for that particular role, well, you're going to get found out pretty damn quick once you get into the role. It's not going to take long before you're going to struggle, and sadly everybody loses.
Yeah.
So companies are starting to adopt integrity statements on their career portals, right through to integrity videos, candidate charters. I think it's important that this goes back to only 10% of organisations having an AI policy. Not only does there need to be an AI policy, there needs to be an AI recruitment policy. So if you think about 10% of companies have an AI policy, we can imagine that there's even less that have an AI recruitment policy. So I completely agree. It's about expectation management, because fundamentally the issues, like if you have used AI to over facilitate and to get through a recruitment process, at some point, from a performance perspective, once you've joined the firm, some of the requirements that are required, you may not be able to fulfill. So it's just actually preventing a longer term issue.
So it's something, obviously in academic writing, transparency in the form of referencing has always been there. We now require or encourage statements of how generative AI was used for the production of some work. We steer away from essays and go more onto kind of reflective pieces, assessing processes rather than just an essay. But I'd like to know if, say, an applicant handed in a CV and stated somewhere generative AI was solely used to improve the structure of this CV, would that have a positive effect on their chances?
I think it depends on, again, whether it's regulated industry or non-regulated, right? So I think that it's a question that a TA leader recently hypothesized at an event, and they said that and this was an experienced hire, not in early careers, and what they saw were common CV types that looked very similar, and so thereby I guess the question is, how do we ensure that it is just being used for enablement and is not being used to mask integrity, for example, like over embellishing certain qualifications or things like that. So I think it's important to state whether you've used AI or not. I think it's a really good idea, actually. But actually, when all of the CV types look the same, then it becomes very difficult, and so thereby it will require more time and validation points in the recruitment process and on the TA professional to meet more candidates, to humanly screen them. So there is a thought right now that recruitment will go back more vintage, because for a firm that I was working for, we moved back to vintage recruitment, so to create in-person type events, to create moments that matter, but also have AI technology enablement online in the process. But I think the trend will move back towards more human interaction in the recruitment process, potentially.
That neatly brings me on to section 4 of today's chat, actually, so thank you very much for that segue. The next part we want to talk about is whether we mitigate, guard or embrace AI, and I think what we're talking about is how does the recruitment process adapt to deal with AI, and how do we think that we're going to perhaps accept the inevitability of change, but have a way of mitigating that. And to your earlier point, I think you perhaps referred to the fact that we don't have enough data yet to judge the impact of AI on recruitment. It hasn't simply been going, if you've only been having it since 2022, 23, really in anger, I guess, in the recruitment sphere. We haven't got much data to work from. So going forward, how do we think that the recruitment industry and the talent assessment industry is going to tackle AI? Are we going to go more vintage, Becky, or Tom, are we going to have a blended approach, or Bertie, are we going to find new cleverer ways of managing this? Whoever wants to start can start.
I mean, I think it's probably going to be a combination of many things, to be brutally honest. I think, do we accept it, do we mitigate it, or do we embrace it? I think was your statement at the start. Well, I think we've got to accept it. I don't think there's any way we can say it's not going to happen, and it is going to happen. So we've got to accept that it's going to happen. Do we embrace it? Well, maybe we do, and it's depending whether you're looking at it from an assessor perspective and using AI to improve the way that you assess candidates, or whether it's from a candidate's perspective and you're saying, well, the candidates are going to be using this to make themselves look the best for the particular role. Yeah. So yeah, there are certainly ways that we can mitigate against candidates, presenting themselves or enhancing their credentials, or if you like, their suitability for a particular role using AI. And it's a difficult one because, I mean, in many ways, what's different between now, sort of 10 years ago or 5 years ago, a candidate going onto Google and searching, I'm looking for a job in this, that would have given the answers, maybe not quite as accurately or quite as effectively as a current generative AI solution will. But, it was always there. We talk about enhancement of CVs. Again, there used to be companies that would do that, or individuals would help you get that thing there. I think we've got to that peak point now where you obviously go back to your point about the CVs all looking the same. I mean, it's a bit like if you look at websites now, pretty much websites now all look the same. They're very rare do you see a different website design. There is what is known to be the best standard layout for a website. So they all tend to look very similar. And then you're looking then at the little flourishes, maybe the little difference in design, colour, style, whatever it might be, to actually differentiate. So, but the actual structure. So I think if you're looking at the CV structure, that's always going to be pretty much standardised now. And you've probably got a best case to that structure will be well adopted by the recruiter. So you'll know where to go and find the information that you need to quickly assess that candidate, for example. So I know that there'll be a section here under education. I can go straight to that, see what the educational qualifications that candidate got. So.
Will the CV, do you think, in future perhaps become more of a validation tool to check the hard facts?
Well, we have CVs.
Yeah, well,
another question.
But are they going to be just purely there so you can check academics? Because obviously that's you can't tweak an academic record. You either have that result or you don't. So
large proportion of candidates do. It's been known that they do exaggerate on CVs. I've heard this before.
But that would surely be fall foul of your integrity.
But again, then again, I suppose you come into things like there are ways that you can assess very quickly whether a candidate has actually got that degree that they've stated on there, or they've got those A-level score results.
Yeah.
And that you don't need a CV for. Potentially, you would just say you'd have an online form. They would say, I've got this score, these A-levels from this college, or this degree from this university. And then I think there are tools. I know there was a company that was speaking at one of the events we were at earlier in the year, and they can do a background check to validate that information.
There's lots of them, aren't
there? And that's really the only way that you can really then validate, yes, they really did go to Exeter University and they got an econ degree from there.
So are CVs a thing of the past or a thing of the future?
Personally, I've always thought there's just a historical document written by the
person they're writing about. Worrying scenario you could think about. We all have our mobile phones, smart watches, whatever, sensors that collect data all the time. You could imagine that data being used instead of a CV because it's the real data. Could be the real data. Again, this can be meddled with.
We'd have to have a chat about that.
But and of course there's massive privacy issues around that. But it's an idea.
I mean, in early careers we don't have CVs anyway, right? So I think this is more professional hiring and executive recruitment. Some early careers teams do have CVs, but generally in the large volume environments, the CVs were a thing of the past. I think we have to do all of it. We have to embrace, we have to mitigate, and we need to detect any risks. And I think with the opportunity of predictive analytics and thinking about how do we use AI to really look at the workforce and how does TA move more into the talents arena. I think the role of TA will broaden fundamentally because actually it's becoming more efficient now with AI. So I think this idea of predicting success is going to be really important. But one thing I would say, which I'm quite curious about, and I don't know the answer right now, is, companies that have adopted AI for screening right now and effectively are presenting those shortlists to hiring managers, what is the feedback that we're getting from those hiring managers? Will there come a point where they're fed up with seeing the same type of candidate? We all know that when you have those hiring manager meetings, they want diversity. They want diversity representation, diversity of thought, and actually, is the current model or the current approach to AI producing that? Is that going to align to performance-based outcomes or organisational success and growth and hyper-growth and enable differentiation across different organisations? Because fundamentally companies differentiate on people, not on their technologies, is on the service that they give. So I think that there will be a point in time soon where a reflection or an inflection point where people will be thinking about what kind of feedback are we actually receiving from the business, and I'm quite interested in that because what I'm seeing at the moment is that there seems to be lots of screening out of great talent using AI potentially.
And is it affecting the diversity of the business ecology effectively, isn't it? Is it having an impact? And I guess until it's run a few more cycles, perhaps you won't have enough data.
And the business may want to go back vintage, right? Because they want to see... So the other point is that lots of coming out of COVID, the trends changed where before COVID we were in person, in COVID we were fully online, we're now blend. So we're now digital online, hybrid and in person. So recruitment's become way more complicated, and now the business wants to see candidates because actually they miss connecting with candidates, the lack of loyalty as well. So in order to hook that candidate in, they want to also meet with business leaders because it's about differentiation around meeting people and extracting that value from that human interaction. So I think the trend is actually moving more towards vintage-based hiring, but
do you think that's predominantly in the early years or early career
I think across
space,
the whole of recruitment, I think that people want to meet candidates, and candidates want to be met as well. So candidates do not want to be treated fully in an online format.
No.
It does not inspire loyalty or engagement. It will increase your renege rate. So I think that there's a balance to be met, and how do we actually now develop the new normal, given we've got AI, we've got coming out of COVID, and we've got the requirement from young people and also all demographics to go back into like a more human type setting.
I think the answer is probably a mix. And while your original question, embracing AI definitely, I think, is a yes.
Okay.
And one might have been tempted to say, mitigating should also be a yes, and maybe guarding against also a yes. There's massive problems with both of those, and one could see there was a ChatGPT ban in Italy soon after ChatGPT became very popular, and it wasn't available from Italian IP addresses, which led to a visible dip in productivity for programmers there. But that lasted only for a week, and they found a workaround. They realised, we can VPN out, and that will be the same with any other thing.
And that's the point: is that whatever you've built now in your recruitment process to mitigate, within the next 12 months, that will be obsolete. So the technology is racing ahead, and we're actually behind. So whatever we develop, the likelihood is that there isn't longevity, or it needs to constantly evolve.
But where I said a bit of everything is really the answer, and that's what big technology companies in their recruitment processes have been using for years. We hear complaints from our students who sometimes have to sit in-person exams, handwritten, and they have to write code. And we tell them, well, this is nothing you shouldn't expect to be doing, because those big technology companies, they will require you to stand there in an interview and develop code, write code, perfect code ideally, on a whiteboard. So that's just the same situation. They won't allow you to sit at a computer and type it, where you might have access to resources like Copilot or so. So they have been using, of course, assessment centres as well, but they diversify their recruitment
I
technology.
think where AI is also very interesting is on this idea of personalisation. So, if you can use AI to help certain talent pools to achieve more in a recruitment process, and to prescribe certain experiences to those candidates based on a lack of learning or a capability gap, or some sort of positive learning opportunity. I think that's where AI could be very, very valuable. So, for example, if you're a student that has not had the opportunity of a work experience or an internship, and perhaps has come from a more of a disadvantaged setting, but yet an organisation could prescribe certain opportunities that will allow the levelling of the playing field, I think, and personalisation, or perhaps it could be certain demographics, for example, in our recruitment process are less likely to do well because of confidence, and this is around specific ethnicities, for example, and also women tend to perform less well in cognitive tests that we saw, and that's across many organisations. So I think in that situation, the ability to prescribe really great experiences that are personalised to certain demographics would be a really great opportunity going forwards.
I think AI tools finding job opportunities could play a big role in opening up opportunities for underrepresented groups.
Yes.
So what's been found in studies quite regularly is that if there are requirements for a job application, male applicants typically are more happy to say, well, I don't fulfill all of those requirements, but I'll apply anyway. And females wouldn't. But if you use AI to encourage females to still look at those opportunities, I think that would be a great tool.
Yeah, and you could also use AI, for example, from an attraction point of view. So thinking about redirecting talent pools from certain industries into your industry, for example. So being attractive on certain career, job portals, for example. So I think there's an opportunity here, but I think this idea of contextualization is really important. So how do we use AI to really benefit recruitment and to really start to bring different talent pools? And at the moment, it looks like it's being used more from an efficiency point of view as opposed to from a contextual point of view.
I think maybe that's the gain to be had, isn't it, I suppose, over time. And it'll be interesting to see where it goes. I'm going to move on now to our Q&A section, if that's okay with everybody. I've got a few lined up, so bear with me while I have a quick look through here. I've got a number of them. I'm going to see. Well, let's lead on, because we've almost answered this question, but I think it's just an enhancement on that question. So one of our audience questions is, what do you think AI will look like in 5 years, and how can we future-proof our assessment process? So answers on a postcard for that individual, please, because that's going to be their strategy for TA for the next. But yeah, so how do we think AI will look like in 5 years? What do we think it will look like, and how can we future-proof? Let's start with you, Bertie, some thoughts on that.
I think future-proof, there is no way to future-proof apart from kind of keeping a close eye on what regulation requires you to do and not to do in terms of AI, creating AI, using AI, all of these. What will AI look like in 5 years' time? I mean, 2 years ago, nobody would have expected ChatGPT to be so big. It's really not predictable. You'd expect it to be even more prominent everywhere. There might be scenarios that are not so... Well, something we don't really want, where AI is used more and more for surveillance purposes, and of course that could be misused also for recruitment, but that's the same problem we had say starting in 2009, where big data became a big thing, and we were in a wild west of everyone just thinking, well, we've got all this data, we can use it for everything we want. So it's that ethics piece, and what I'd hope to see in the next 5 years is AI that's much more aligned with our ethical values in societies.
So do you think that leads you on to your point around sort of policies being part of the operating model?
I think the lack of regulation right now and interpretation is a big challenge. I think this idea of ethicalness and integrity is going to be really, really important. Dark AI will come. There will be more suspicious, sophisticated means. And so we have to equip ourselves with the latest technology. So there will be an explosion of new technology, particularly in the education sector. Apparently in the Silicon Valley, it's a huge growth market right now around AI detection. We don't have true AI detection. A lot of the assessment company providers were caught out when AI, with the proliferation of AI in the student recruitment process. So I think that there will be more technology coming in, there'll be more investment. What I would like to see, I guess for anyone that's listening out there, but what I would like to see is AI being used to help candidates be nurtured in the journey. So maybe job coach. I love the idea of an avatar being a coach. How do you have your own personal career coach in a recruitment process that is aligned to organisational parameters, that helps to build loyalty, advocacy, confidence, soft skills, some of the areas that as a recruiter I would like to do that more. So I think, how do we use and embrace it in a positive way to bring those talent pools through a process that are nurtured and that will also have that stickability to stay in an organisation, and also really encourage that brand loyalty.
That brings us on to one of our next questions actually, which is how do you think AI can be used to enhance the candidate experience as well? So in terms of it being not just facilitating the TA's experience in the recruitment process, how do we use AI to benefit candidates, to enhance that advocacy, for example, that brand loyalty or the retention through the assessment process? How do you think we could leverage AI for that?
I think there's a number of ways you can do that. I mean, obviously the most obvious way, I suppose, in the short term is using AI to optimise that recruitment process, so that you're helping, you're looking at what works, and as you say, by using certain sort of ways of understanding what for a candidate to perform well in this particular role or in this particular industry or sector, wherever it is, what are we actually looking for, and understanding that maybe a little bit more. So using AI to help with that, but then also helping then tell a story and engage the candidates in more effective ways, so that they, as you say, they almost become like a maybe like a sort of a personal sort of guide through the recruitment process, giving them prompts, helping them along the way to actually give their best of themselves. So ignoring the GPT bit derived answers, but really authentically, this is who I am as a candidate, and this is and irrespective of their background and their sort of the historical sort of relevance, it's what can I do to really perform well in this role, so I can expose that to the potential hiring manager or the recruiter. So I'm sure there's ways we can use AI to improve that.
I don't know if you've got any thoughts from your student exposure that you have. I mean, how do you think AI could help students through become engaged and have a good experience of recruitment? Is there any bits you'd pick on specifically?
I mean, I think that guidance piece, knowing about students' skills, knowing more about what are the desired skills that certain sectors, certain industries have, that can be very helpful.
I agree. I think this idea of from early engagement, if you're on campus, for example, you've got a nurtured journey. So we understand through AI what your skill set looks like, and then we can then present those opportunities, because often students, on campus, there are some really great career advisory centres on campus, but there's not many of them, and there's lots of students, and so it's almost a very similar situation to TA. So we have lots of volume and not enough recruiters actually connecting, and having those moments that matter for students. And with COVID, there was a loss of learning, and there's definitely a lack of confidence. We saw students being at least 3 months behind key academic milestones because they were, in some of our assessments, for example, there was a 15%, and this was a cross-industry drop in assessment scores, and this was reported by big assessment providers. So this idea that if you're meeting a candidate and they could effectively talk to you about their skills and have a degree of personalisation, and thereby an organisation could create opportunities to them and signpost those opportunities, build confidence, being more like a career guide, I think would be highly beneficial, because lots of young people just don't have that kind of compass or navigation. They haven't worked in organisations like us for donkey's years, where we know like, oh, HR does this and audit does that, and legal does that and compliance does that. So it's being able to look at a student or a person in terms of the skills and the potential, and what kind of roles might map, or in terms of skills-based hiring, what are their motivations, how can we present those opportunities to them better,
things that they would not otherwise have been exposed to, so we can use AI in a really positive way, and also help organisations at the same time by sharing the volume of opportunities they have, rather than restricting it to what the candidate thinks is applicable to them.
So and also with many companies, they only allow one application per season, right? And I'm talking specifically with early careers, but wouldn't it be better for a company to talk to that candidate and say, well, actually, you could apply for that role, but we actually think you're better off going over here based on your motivations, your skills, and your kind of passion. And what we found in companies is that you get students, and it's not a bad thing, but they might end up doing a route that is not right for them. So many students, for example, they choose university and actually should be doing an apprenticeship, right? So it's that, how can we use AI to better inform young people of the right pathway that is equally available and as rewarded, whether you're a graduate or apprenticeship route, it's the same route, but we could actually provide that career advice much earlier in the funnel.
I'd certainly underline those different pathways. And there's degree apprenticeships now. In Germany, I know there's dual degrees where you do an apprenticeship and study kind of in block mode, side by side. That's very promising. One thing that came to mind is when we talk about traditional recruitment processes as well as AI-informed ones, when we talk about skills, this really is something where we might miss out on talent that hasn't proven their skills yet. And this is where, in a traditional interview or some other in-person assessment, especially in teams, some people might unlock skills that they weren't even aware of. So seeing that recruitment process as something that's actually beneficial to the applicant as well,
that's true.
Is something that we're
Providing
losing by
feedback. I think for me, I always think that young people deserve feedback, and it needs to be meaningful. So how can AI be used to present feedback that matters, that will actually help that person be redirected, not rejected, because that also has an ongoing impact to confidence, particularly with certain demographics. So it's how do you actually use it to drive value and to give that person more insight of themselves and to better equip themselves for the future.
That would be very powerful, wouldn't it, if that could be achieved? Just moving on, we've got 2 more questions today, panel. Should we be upskilling our workforce to acquire new skills to work alongside AI?
Absolutely.
Yes, and yes. I think that's a straightforward yes to that question. I'll ask you the last one. There has been a comment made on, everyone's interested, Bertie, I'm afraid, to explore your point on future data. So the CV conversation about smartwatches and personal data versus CVs. So I think you've opened a point there that everyone would like a little bit more information on. I think people want to know, how do you differentiate yourself? Let's say CVs are taken out of the frame. So how do individuals differentiate themselves at the point of entry? what do we think could happen there?
I mean, I think in terms of, and this links in with the other question that we all said, yes, we need to upskill and have lifelong learning in some way or other. I think we need to probably move away from this idea that the STEM subjects and technology is all that matters, because that is something where AI will be good at, and better than us. If you just put a mathematical equation into a computer, it'll probably come up with a solution much, much faster than a human being, at least if it's not something super complicated. But those other skills that make life worth living, communication, kind of emotional intelligence, living in a context, creativity as such. A lot of people claim AI can be creative. I don't think that is true. I think there are other values that humans have and that should play a role in defining creativity, and it's certainly not just randomly generating all kinds of stuff and then finding some more interesting, whatever the criterion for that might be. That's not creativity. And kind of nurturing those skills, I think that is something that we definitely need to focus on.
It's interesting because it brings us, doesn't it, to the topic which isn't for today, but which is around sort of the future of work and future-proof skills. And as we've alluded to, the fact that half or just over half of roles haven't yet been created. So how do we hire for the future? I'm not going to go into and open that up this afternoon, this morning, but
I think potential is the big one. So it's this side, to your point, Bertie, it's around. So we were building models around curious thinking, applying logic and thought, so you being able to use AI. So I know companies now are looking at, in their process, how do you assess people that have the ability to learn and propensity of learning, tech acuity, which is learning around AI. So it's going to be more important to find candidates that have tech acuity, that are curious, that are engaged, that have communication skills. The soft skills now being the new hard skills, they have to be with AI, because hard skills AI can do. And I think it's really a good point about the STEM as well. So the differentiator are things like motivation. I call it passion, affinity, purpose, right? So how do you align your purpose? How do we assess on purpose? Do we, if we hire people that have the same purpose or align to purpose, then effectively they're going to stay. I think there's a lot of talk right now around stickability and talent loss and attrition, because it's easier to move around and we're nomadic. You can apply for a job in any country now. You can work digitally, nomadic roles, so I think this idea of potential is going to be more featured.
Thank you very much. And that brings us to the end of our Q&A session today. Thank you all very much for your valued contributions. I've really enjoyed our chat, and I hope everybody watching has enjoyed as well. And we'll call it to a day there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.